Hallo, mein Name ist David Marwell und ich bin der Präsident des Leo Baeck Instituts New York-Berlin. Es ist mir eine Freude und Ehre, Sie auf unserer Konferenz Shared History 1700 Years of Jewish Life in German-Speaking Lands begrüßen zu dürfen. On behalf of my colleagues in New York and Berlin, it is my pleasure to introduce this opening session of the conference and to express my gratitude to all who helped make it possible with hard work and with financial support. While we cannot and must not ever forget the intended and nearly successful destruction of Jewish life in Germany, at the same time, we must remember that Jewish life animated and that Jewish lives were lived throughout the 1700 years that have passed since Constantine's Edict of 321, which is the first known document that mentions the existence of Jews in Central Europe. In the 17th century, since Constantine set his seal on that important document, Jews have made their mark on Germany and in the lands where German was and is spoken. The history of Jews in German-speaking lands has been punctuated with repeating themes of migration, inclusion, exclusion, persecution, acculturation, achievement, and renewal. We believe firmly that understanding and studying this shared history may very well equip us and all who share their lands with minorities and new neighbors to better navigate a shared present and to chart a course for a shared future. Throughout the year 2021, the Leo Baeck Institute, along with its partners, will present exhibitions, conferences, and an innovative online program to relate the story of 1700 years of Jewish life in German-speaking lands. As with every aspect of life during the COVID pandemic, planning a conference has been made much more difficult. We are pleased and grateful to those who have submitted papers and, of course, to the authors of the 24 papers that were eventually selected. We wish to thank the presenters and all of you for adapting to the changing circumstances which led us to this virtual format. The opening session and the 8 sessions that will follow over the next days will highlight the breadth and depth of Jewish participation in the history of German-speaking lands. We at the Leo Baeck Institute sincerely hope that you will stay connected to the Shared History Project as we reveal a new object each week, related story, and the role it played in this rich shared history. Bevor wir mit dem Eröffnungspanel der Konferenz beginnen, möchte ich 2 Personen vorstellen, die die Institutionen vertreten, die diese Konferenz finanziell unterstützt haben. Botschafterin Michaela Küchler vom Auswärtigen Amt und Thomas Kruger, Präsident der Bundeszentrale für politische Bildung.
Dear Billy Weitzer, dear Miriam Bistrowitz, dear Hetty Berg, dear Josef Joffe, dear Max Czollek. In 2021, we look back on 1,700 years of Jewish life in Germany. But do we celebrate? The past months make us doubt, and I don't mean the corona pandemic with its restrictions on social life. I mean the assassin of Halle parading his anti-Semitism, racism, and misogyny in court. I mean the numerous conspiracy theories spreading on the internet and during demonstrations, and being shared by so many people. The core is always anti-Semitism. The same applies to outrageous historical comparisons and appropriations of self-proclaimed corona rebels. Descendants of the National Socialist People's Community behave as victims, relativizing the Holocaust by wearing a yellow Star of David with the inscription unvaccinated. It is particularly because of this outrageous anti-Semitic roar that we must refer to the everyday aspects of Jewish life in Germany, to cultural and economic achievements, to friendships and love stories between members of majority and minority. Political education has realized that Jews do not want to be merely seen as experts in anti-Semitism. or as actors in a theatre of remembrance staged by non-Jewish Germans for non-Jewish Germans. In future projects, the Federal Agency for Civic Education will place even more emphasis on the large diversity of Jewish life in present and past, as well as its interweavement with its non-Jewish environment. And of course, many Jews themselves are actively engaged in our civil society to fight for their rights and against anti-Semitism. This relationship, however, should not be described with the phantasmagoria of a pleasantly sounding Christian-Jewish Occident, disguising the brutal anti-Jewish tradition of Christianity for decades, and serving merely as an instrument for marginalizing the others, in particular Muslims. It suggests the Shoah being only an accident in a history of an undauntedly thriving symbiosis. Looking back on history shows a much more complex and uncomfortable reality. Periods of emancipation were followed by even harsher hostilities and attacks. This conference's title reveals the dialectics and ambivalences of 1,700 years of Jewish life in Germany. It's a shared history that refers to a shared heritage as well as a divided one. The Leo Baeck Institute and the Jewish Museum Berlin are two institutions representing this differentiated view on history. Therefore, I am very pleased to have the opportunity to organize this conference with you as a kick-off of this anniversary year. In 2021, we will continue to participate in the Shared History project of the LBI with our program. We will not abandon our self-critical spirit, and I very much hope that we will have many reasons to celebrate in the year ahead of us. Thank you for your attention and all the best for this conference.
Ladies and gentlemen, not 8 days, but 2,000 years, that jar of oil did last. To quell its wondrous flames availed no storm, no flood, no blast. This is what the 20th century Jewish American poet Philip Raskin writes in his Hanukkah poem entitled The Miracle. In German-speaking lands, Jewish life has enlightened and enriched all areas of society for more than 1,700 years. Jewish religion, traditions and cultures are part of our joint culture. What we know as Jewish life today builds on the experience of this long and eventful history. Coming together to reflect on 1,700 years of shared German-Jewish history opens up the possibility of highlighting that Jewish life is not separate from German history. It is an essential part of it. The long history of persecution, which culminated in humanity's darkest hour, the Shoah, is of course part of our shared history. And today, we are as committed as ever to honoring the responsibilities that result from it. The outstanding Jewish contributions in the fields of philosophy, science, business, art and culture influence our present life in Germany and around the world in the best way. The multitude of voices within the Jewish community is a great strength. It is something we can all learn from. It shows us how diversity can be enriching and a resource for society instead of divisive. For us, as the German Federal Foreign Office, the occasion of 1,700 years of German Jewish life is both an opportunity and an obligation to show in Germany and around the world that Jewish life and traditions are an important part of our shared society. Too little is still known about German-Jewish shared history in all its facets, especially in Germany itself. This has to be changed, and that is why we are very pleased to support the Leo Baeck Institute at this conference. As we have entered the month of light and Hanukkah is approaching, the festival of light, we are reminded that in order to remove the darkness, we have to add light. This conference comes at a time where we are all committed to fighting those who are trying to increase the darkness. Anti-Semitism, anti-Gypsyism, racism, extremism. As we approach the Festival of Light, we are reminded that each of us brings our own individual little light with us to create one bright light for the world. This is a joint effort and a joint responsibility. I wish you all a happy Hanukkah and a good conference.
Our opening panel, Jewish Life Today, A Multitude of Voices, is a particularly fitting topic for an opening conversation. To lead this discussion, it is a pleasure to introduce Josef Joffe, a longtime member of the board of the Leo Baeck Institute, New York, Berlin, and himself the recipient of the Leo Baeck Medal, the Institute's most prestigious honor. Josef Joffe is the publisher-editor of Die Zeit, the world-famous German weekly newspaper. Alongside this important activity, Joffe has had a distinguished career in the academy, which includes research and teaching positions at some of the world's leading universities, including Munich, Stanford, and Harvard. Josef Joffe will introduce our two panelists, Hetty Berg, director of the Jewish Museum Berlin, and Max Czollek, poet, writer, stage performer, and sociologist. Thank you.
Wow, that was the best introduction I've had in the last 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Welcome to the keynote of Shared History. As it spreads around the net, this brilliant conversation we are about to have will undoubtedly double our audience tomorrow. Allow me to introduce briefly the two panelists, whom you can see. Hetty Berg became the director of the Jewish Museum Berlin on 1st of April, and she comes to Berlin from the Jewish Historical Museum in Amsterdam. She started out there as a curator in 1989 and then rose relentlessly. Ever since, she has devoted her career to Jewish history and culture. She knows more about both and how to exhibit them than any person I know. She also knows more languages, namely 6, than anybody I know. So the Jewish Museum Berlin and the city itself should be proud to have caught her. Max Czollek lives in Berlin, and he will deal with one of the really urgent issues, not just talking about the past, but about the present and the future. He was an initiator of Desintegration, ein Kongress zeitgenössischer jüdischer Position. There you have it, the present. This year, he organized the International Tage der jüdisch-muslimischen Leitkultur, and he has, interestingly, also published 2 volumes of poetry. His latest book comes with the fascinating title, Gegenwartsbewältigung, which, like Vergangenheitsbewältigung, is impossible to translate into English. Our topic today is easy. It's Jewish Life Today, a multitude of voices. Each of our 2 panelists will introduce it in a few minutes. Then we will go back and forth for a bit and then have questions from the audience. Hetty, the floor is yours.
Well,
Can
so
you hear me?
we just decided to change the program. I'm going to start.
All right.
If it's okay for you, we're just going to do it like that. So we'll start this conference very Jewish with us toppling every plan we made before. So we can kind of go against the marvelous time plan we have had so far. So thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really happy and honored to share the panel with you, with the people who are coming the coming days. And for my opening words, I just wanted to kind of set down a few details that a lot of you probably know, but I think it's important to just kind of build this base in order to have a foundation to then talk about, right? So what we see today is a Jewish community or Jewish population, as I like to say it, because it's not necessarily a community, that has changed profoundly especially with the influx of ex-Soviet Jews in the 1990s. So by now, the Jewish community is made up of over 90% of Jews that have come from the Soviet Union, but not only that, but also Israelis, Ashkenazim, Sfaradim, Mizrahim, people from all countries in this world, people with different sexual orientations, people who have different political orientations, which I think is important because in a way, I think people tend to imagine the Jewish community to be, or Jewish population to be, much more homogeneous than it actually is. It's very different also with its religious affiliations, a lot more liberal Jews than you may have found before. Now, you may say that the Jewish community has been different all along. That is true, but in a way, what has changed is that institutions have sprung up, which have really not been there ever since the Second World War, namely the Jewish school in Berlin. I was actually an attendee of that school for 13 years, and then the Ernst Ludwig Ehrlich Studienwerk, a scholarship program which has just been founded about 11 years ago. So by now, which is really new, as a Jew in Germany, you can really go through Jewish institutions and have an education. That was something that wasn't possible before. You always had to enter a space which was not Jewish at all. So what you find now is a radically changed Jewish environment, which I think has very striking consequences. One of them, and I just want to give you 3 terms which we then may be able to talk about later, just to give you an idea of the consequences that I would see. One of them is that the Jewish reality in Germany less and less fits the frame of the function assigned to the Jews in Germany and Thomas Krüger just mentioned it before, the theater of memory. Now, the theater of memory is not a term I made up, but it was made up by Michael Bodemann in 1996, and it tries to explain the symbolic function Jews perform for a reinvention of the German self after 1945. As I said, we can talk about that later. The second one, I think, and that was mentioned in the second introductory speech, is that I think the frameworks we've been working with so far to understand the history of the Jewish minority in Germany today is not fitting anymore, namely to tell the Jewish history in Germany as a Jewish-German relationship. I think there's much more to be said about a Jewish history that is not only Jewish-German relationship, but also a relationship to other minorities, Jewish-Muslim relationships, Jewish Gypsy, Jewish lower classes, all that kind of things. And the third one is that also in the present, probably the Jewish community cannot well be described within the framework of something very, very German called integration paradigm. And that all ends up with a concept that I think works better to understand Jewish diversity today, which is the framework of radical diversity. And I'm glad to talk about that a bit later, and I'm now very excited to hear what Hetty has to say.
As I said, I'm new here in Berlin, and I will answer this question of the multitude of voices as it is expressed in the new permanent exhibition in the Jewish Museum Berlin. And I'm delighted to say that this whole dynamic context and this multitude of voices is really mirrored in this new exhibition. And not as many Jewish museums were up till now, that it just shows the traces of a of a culture's past, but it's really, it shows the vibrant Jewish life today as well. And the multitude of voices we see, for example, in the exhibition in a video work that is called The Way We Walk. It's about halakha, and you see these different Jews in Germany today that talk in what way, how they relate to the halakha in their daily life, and it goes from completely secular to orthodox. So there you already have this multitude of voices or these multiple perspectives, but then from the religious way, but also in the course of the exhibition, in the period of after 1945, you see all these groups where every time there was a crisis in Europe, a new group of Jews would enter. So from the 50s from Poland, in the 60s from Czechoslovakia, then in the 80s the Iranian Jews, then as you mentioned the Russian-speaking Jews, the Israelis, etc., etc. So every time there's all these different groups and different Jewish identities are represented through home movies and through other means in the exhibition, and that really gives this very interesting multi perspectives of Jewish life today. But not only in the present we show these multiple voices, also in the past, because in the past it was the same. So from we show the relations between the Jews and their non-Jewish surroundings, whatever they were at the time, and also the exchange between the Jews and the non-Jews of the time. So from the Middle Ages, Enlightenment, till the present, you also have the female voice, for example. So there's a lot of attention has been given to also present the female voice. And you can say that all these themes of inclusion and belonging, identity, diversity, those are the pressing questions of today, but they're also the themes that run through the entire history of the Jews in what we call now Germany. A third point where we can say that we are dealing with a multitude of voices is that we like to be a place, a space in Berlin, in Germany, where a multitude of voices can be heard. So that we are a place where open debates and discussions can take place with people that are not of the same opinion, but of different opinions, and that is in the present climate more and more rare and difficult to have open discussions with people that you don't agree with beforehand already. And I think that is also a very important role for the museum to offer this place to hear a multitude of voices as well. I don't hear him.
Let me ask you the opposite question. Is there something that's unifying the Jewish community here? Is there a collective identity, or are there just multiple voices and nothing else? Who wants to go first?
Well, I think, if I may now, I think what is unifying them is that all these different expressions and personal voices, all these people still identify as Jews. So in that sense, that unifies them, that they see themselves as Jews. And I think what also brings them together is the place where they live in. So Germany or Berlin, and Berlin is of course a very special scene at the moment, because so many different groups and young people, as Max also mentioned, are living here today, and which really gives a very interesting moment in time for Jewish life. At least that's how I experience it.
Jewish is the 2000 question, but one answer I heard from you was the core of their identity may be where they live, which is Berlin or Germany. Is that correct?
Well, can I? Well,
Yeah, sure.
I think there's maybe, I mean, I totally agree with what Hetty says, and I think that is the beauty about Jewish identity is that it's a framework for difference, right? We heard that also in the introductory statements, and I think that is something beautiful about that, and it makes it very modern in a way because it's able to contain this multitude. But at the same time, I would like to point to an aspect that may be a bit more problematic and a bit more German at the same time, which is that I think we're living in decisive times for we can see a quest for a new Jewish identity of the 21st century, not only in Germany, but also in Europe. And that is something that is really coming out of the catastrophe of, obviously, the 20th century, which is still very much there in a way. And I think you can see that in the way Jewish self-expression is being done in theaters, in books, in writing, and in art. And at the same time, you can sense a shifting place of where the search is going to. So in the last years, we have seen a lot of, especially of the Jews coming from the Soviet migration, starting to find their voices in art much more, I think, than what we saw with a more religious framework before. So we see a bit of a friction, I think, of what may be something like a greater attention for the past and for what we have lost, and a search for how to live up to the radical diversity of what Jewish life means today in Germany.
What is that past, what you just said, the past we have lost? How would they define or remember that past? I mean, these newcomers.
Yeah.
Any good answer?
Well, I think yet again you can see a bit of a I don't know if it's generational or if it's also East and West in a way. I'm coming from a family that is from the GDR, so there's a bit of a different narrative there, a much more political narrative of what Jewish identity means, if you want so. But you can see, if you look at the publishing sphere, for example, the Jüdischer Almanach. That was something that was still after the war trying to kind of live up to the bourgeois Jewish history that had given a lot of great impulses to what German cultural life had been. And that was something that still had to be preserved and thought about and researched all through the second half of the 20th century. And
let me ask something. You mentioned before all these multiple voices, Israelis, Russians, Soviets, from Arab lands, etc. How does that past, which is Ashkenazi, Western, German, bind the newcomers who are now part of the community together, or does it not matter? Is there something else that defines their identity as a community?
Well, I think, Hetty, maybe you want to say something about that.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking of the 50 different Jews in Germany that are at the very end of the exhibition in the video work Mesubin of Yael Reuveni. And there you see women, men, children. They all tell what it means for them today to be a Jew in Germany. And of course the person from the former Soviet Union has a very different relationship to to the Shoah or to some days in which we remember the Shoah, and people from the GDR have also been raised with a very different narrative, but also, you know, people from Iran, all those different groups, they all have a different, have been brought up with a different narrative. But I think that the fact that they all make up now, or they are all part of this Jewish population in Germany, they're also, because of the place where they live now, there are binding elements, and there are also things from history that they have to deal with, and everybody has to deal with, and that also, I think that also brings people together, even if you have not been versed in that history when you were a child. And that's not just for Jews, also from people that come to Germany and live here for many years. They will be that narrative, and somehow they will have to engage with it.
The place where they live now, we come back to that question. That binds them together. How does it do so? Is it the pride of being a Berliner, or is it a German identity, as now we've made it from persecution and poverty, and we are now, if you wish, in the promised land? What is it? I'm curious, because I don't know the answer.
Well, I think one of the stories that I hear a lot from friends moving to Berlin, especially from Israel or the States or wherever, is that they start to feel more Jewish in Berlin. They start to feel more Jewish in Germany. And I think that is not entirely innocent. That tells you something about how there's a certain demand for a specific Jewishness that you do not feel in Israel, because it's a dominant, like a mainstream majority Jewish culture, and that you don't see in the same way in the States. And that, I think, is something very, very telling about how Jewish identity is being put under a double pressure here. One is the past of how Jewish institutions have defined and seen themselves being shaken by a changing Jewish makeup by its own population, and at the same time, a demand for the Jew from a non-Jewish side, which needs the symbolic Jew to reinvent something like the good German. So there's a double pressure that is, I think, not only bad, but also opening up for a great creativity and a great source of energy that we can see now happening in Berlin.
So we'll reinvent or reinvent a new presence or a new future? Is that what you mean?
Yes, but I think the point is we're not only reinventing a new future for a Jewish population in Germany, but at the same time we'll have to reinvent Germany itself. That is the interesting thing about that.
So the Jews will have to reinvent Germany?
Yes, we'll have to reinvent a framework that is making it possible for Jews not to only be the survivors, not to only be a part of the theater of memory. And for that, you really have to move beyond those concepts that have been established so far.
Give me the first 2 or 3 steps, if you can.
Yeah, I gladly do so, but I think, I don't know if, should I go on? Okay.
And look, you can break at any time, please.
No problem.
Okay, let's see. I think one thing that we can see today is that we still operate within the, let's say, I don't know, how do you say Betriebssystem? The software that Germany is running on. The software that the German political, like this, the society imagination is running on, is an idea of a German dominant culture where people have to integrate in, minorities have to behave well in order to become democratic, and then you have different minorities playing different roles. I think if you think about the 20th century from a Jewish perspective, there's only, I think only one answer will be to say we'll have to have more police in front of synagogues and Jewish institutions in order to protect them better next time. The other side would be to say, in order for that stuff not to happen again, we'll have to change the way German society imagines itself. And for that, you have to change the software it is running on. And I'd argue that we'll have to come to a point when the notion of integration, dominance, and harmony is being substituted by a new concept of what being diverse and being different in society means. And only then a Jewish life will be a life that is not only a minority life, but a part of German society, which will be at the same time Christian, at the same time Muslim, at the same time secular, lesbian, queer, and at the same time Jewish. That'll be a vision, I think, that'll be interesting.
The culture in which these new people have come is like a chorus. It's where everybody sings his own tune, and we somehow think that we will come up with a harmonious pattern. I mean, the idea is to break down community, be it a Jewish or a national community, and have some vast pot of differences and diversities. What do you think, Hetty?
Well, I think it's a beautiful idea that it really doesn't matter so much where you come from, who you are, and that there is equal space for all these different personal expressions. And I think that in the we're indeed at a kind of pivotal moment in history, because when the museum was founded in the 90s, I think everybody had this idea that we were on the way to a Jewish normality in German society, and that it would become more and more normal again to be a Jew in Germany, etc., with all the work that German society did about the Vergangenheitsbewältigung and coming to terms with the past. But what we see today, in spite of also this very vibrant, dynamic Jewish life in very unexpected corners, not just the Jewish community, but all kind of activities, events, people discussing what does it mean to be a Jew in Germany today, which are all positive developments. At the same time, there is this really shift in society with which is more and more polarized, where there's more and more people that leave the liberal thinking and the democratic ideas, and so there's also a big challenge in society. So these are two contradictory movements at the moment, and we don't really know where this will go to.
I think you made a very important point here. I think the problem is the more you emphasize different group identities, be it defined by culture or history or nationality, the more you emphasize differences. And the less unity or community you have. The multicultural universe that we are talking about needs something above the multicultural that keeps the pot together, so to speak, rather than multiple identities competing with each other for attention or resources and power. Can the Jews provide that kind of sense of unity? Because Marx said the Jews have to rewrite the software. I thought it was a very ambitious project, but very interesting. Go ahead, Mr. Engineer, go ahead.
I think I would say that we'll have to, that is something that you just said that people say a lot in Germany, which is, what is the common narrative? If there's not a common narrative, society is going to atomize, going to fall apart and all that. I'm not sure if that is an anthropological law. I'm not sure if you look at our own lives that are going on today and now, that the stuff I'm lacking or the stuff I'm needing is one common narrative. And I feel like if you ask minorities other minorities which are now being threatened by what Hetty Berg just said, which is not only a polarization, but it's an intensification of violence. It's an intensification of attacks. We have seen this year and last year especially. If you ask those minorities, I think the quest for a common idea or a common notion is very basic. And I think that is something that a dominant position, a privileged position, doesn't necessarily see, because it already has this as a natural given, which is the idea to live safely in this country. I think that would be something that we all can agree to, and it at the same time be something that is not being guaranteed right now. So that would be great, no?
But the interesting issue is rooted in history, so I want to press this home a little bit. The Jews who came to this country in the age of emancipation, where they rose very quickly through the ranks of the culture and the arts and the economy, they displayed a very powerful attachment to this Germany, which had given us so much better life than it was in Russia, for instance, or in Poland. So that, if I understand you correctly, that is no longer there and it's no longer necessary. There need not be any particular attachment to the society you live in, correct?
I feel sorry for talking to you, but this one point I want to make, what we can see is that it didn't work. That's the whole point, that the integration, the assimilation to society led up to a point when people gave up their own defense because they had identified so much with German society that they couldn't believe what was happening to them. So to a certain degree, staying different means staying on the defense, and being able to defend yourself if something like this is happening again. So one of the lessons you can take from the 20th century is that the promise of integration is at the same time ripping you off your defenses. So yes, I think to stay different to a certain degree is going to be necessary to be militant or to be what we call wehrhafte Demokratie.
Well, we're not going to learn how to use a rifle, are we? But I mean, the point here's the question, less, the more sober question is, can you or Hetty imagine that the threat to identities like a Jewish identity will return in force in this country 2020 or 2030? What do you think?
Well, I would not like to imagine it, and I tend to be an optimistic person. On the other hand, it's of course very disconcerting that especially the violence and the attacks have increased, but it's also not something just of the last years. It has always, with certain intervals, violent attacks on Jews have taken place here in Germany, and that is a very big difference to the Netherlands, where I've grown up and where I've lived so far. So that is, a point that I find very hard to deal with, to be in a society where those things happen. But as an optimistic person, I think the only thing to do is to go against that, and also to inform people. Most people don't have that say nowadays on social media, and people are so feel so much more free to say things against Jews and also against other minorities. So the barriers to say things or to think, oh, I better not say that seems to be completely gone, and that is of course a very dangerous thing, because most of the people that say those things don't have any knowledge about what Jews are, or they don't know them. I mean, this is also like in the demonstrations that they put on the Magenta Fetus, or the yellow star, not the Magenta Feet, but the yellow star with unimphed, like this total disconnection of what something meant in the past. And I think that is the big task, to inform, educate, and especially to give people to think for themselves, instead just to take over ready-made opinions and just repeat what other people say, but to learn them to think and to form their own opinion. And that's something that we try to do in the museum.
Hetty, that's exactly where you are, and that's exactly what the main task of the museum should be. I'm just wondering about the power of idea, or the power of information. Do you think, either of you think, that you can remove or defang prejudice by informing people of their misbegotten ideas? It reminds me a bit, we have to go back in history, there was a very German Zentralverein, Jewish Zentralverein in Germany, and they published a whole series of pamphlets trying to contradict and and remove every single prejudice that Germans had harbored about Jews. It had exactly zero influence on the future course of German history at the end of the Weimar Republic. I'm fascinated, and that's why I want to ask a curator or director of a museum, how does it work to show people, to teach them? Does it change their basic outlooks? I mean, if anybody knows, it's you, Hetty.
Well, I think that it's the people that don't have these, the real anti-Semites will not visit the museum, of course. I mean, they have these fixed ideas, but it's especially the general public that might have these notions or these stereotypical ideas about Jews, where you can, not by saying, oh, what you think is not right, and you should not think that. No, by showing them this multifaceted history, and also the Jewish present, to show them that it's not that there's not one Jewish perspective. And we tell the history of the Jews in Germany from Jewish perspectives. There are many different ways to look at it. There are many stories, and you put something next to what they think, and that's what I mean. We try to encourage and stimulate people to think and to form their own opinion. And then if you put something next to what they have what they're thinking already, there is a chance that they will just change this opinion bit by bit. And I think especially if you start with the young generation, that has an effect. But as I said, I'm an optimist, and that's what I should be, I think, in this position.
One more question on that. Do you have any example that you might relate with it to us, how that mechanism you just described works, how information changes opinion? I mean, from the museum, have you, say, a school class that has come in, or what have you?
Yes, well, I know from the Netherlands also, especially with guided tours, if you don't just start telling a story and just sending information, but if you first try to find out what the people that come, your visitors, are thinking about Jews, or what is the information that they come up with when they come into the door. And if you can connect to that, then you have, if you really make contact with your visitors, then you have a bigger chance to have an impact than if you're just sending. So that is more pedagogical method, but it's also very interesting new part of the exhibition here in the museum in Berlin is a debate room. In this debate room, it's for school classes, but also for other groups. There are 4 examples of recent cases that can be called anti-Semitic, but they're quite ambivalent. It's not a terrible attack, of course, in Halle, because there's no discussion. But other examples like that, I'm calling somebody in the schoolyard, "Hey, you Jew," or the depiction of a Jew as a pig on the church in Wittenberg. All these kind of things that the children there are discussing. Where does it start to be anti-Semitic or not? Or the whole debate about circumcision. I mean, it's not only Jews that are confronted with that, also the Muslim population, of course. So there are discussions, and there you have also this multiplicity of voices, because there are many different opinions, and they have to listen to each other, and then they have to say again whether they think something is anti-Semitic or not. They also do it at the beginning and then at the end. So there you see that people, by talking about it with each other, they are changing their opinions.
Let me introduce one question from the audience before we continue. Lucas Ruser asks, you know, there's a term called Entkrampfung, relaxation of tension, another German word hard to translate, between Jewish Israelis and Germany. I mean, Israel and Germany, the 2 populations. I mean, certainly the Israelis come a very, very long way from the kind of fear and hatred of things German in the 50s. And so the questioner says, could you perhaps widen this idea to Jews in general as well? He probably means between Jews and the Gentile environment. This Entkrampfung, is there Entkrampfung happening? Is there kind of relaxation of tension happening in Germany between Jews and the general population? What do you think, either of you? No answer?
I probably will have to say yes at the same time, yes and no, right? What you see is a more, like what I observe is a greater desire and capacity for self-definition and self-determination. That is something that I find very mature. So in a way, that is something that leads into a state more structured by a mature relationship of a minority to a majority culture. But at the same time, you can see how Jews take a very specific and special position within the German public because of the history. And that, I think, makes it very difficult to talk of something like Entkrampfung, or another term that has been used a lot is Normalisierung, to normalize. And I think against that, and that is something I wrote in Deintegrate Yourselves in my first essay, was that I would like to amend something to the German Grundgesetz, which is, es wird nie wieder alles gut. It's never going to be good again. Because I feel like the German acts of memory, the German culture of memory, really points to a point in time when society is going to be redeemed and everything is going to be good again. And I feel like this is really blocking a critical discussion of colonialism, of anti-Semitism, of the presence of all those violent traditions and violent genealogies which are still active today, which is still part of the software to use that image once more, we are still running on today, and we can see that. We have to understand why a Völkisch party like AfD was able to gain as many votes, which was an eighth of the votes given out that year, within 1 or 2 years of its existence. So there got to be something about the way we had been thinking that wasn't quite visible, that was kind of blocked by the idea of normalization and of memory and of being good again and all that, that kind of broke open when this party stepped into the light. So I think there's much more to talk about continuity and less to talk about Entkrampfung.
What you seem to be saying is this: if we combat all forms of dislike, hatred, contempt, discrimination, if we talk about colonialism, if we talk about blacks, if we talk about sexual orientation, what have you, I mean, run through the gamut, then the Jews will profit too? Or will the Jews maintain that role where they are the universal Sündenbock, the sacrificial lamb, if you wish? Will goodness in the society, will that be good for the Jews?
I see what you're trying to get at. I think I'd turn it around and say, as long as we live in a society where specific minorities are not able to live safely in, it's also not going to be a society where Jews can live safely. So what we can see is that as long as right now it'd be, for example, Muslims are being targeted by right-wing Germans or by right-wing terrorists, as long as that happens, Jews are going to be targeted sooner or later. And that, I think, is something that from the Jewish side, and now you have a bit of a critique in that, that I think from the Jewish side is sometimes being overlooked in a kind of wishful thinking, to feel like because this catastrophe has happened to us already, it's not going to happen to us again. And I'd be going with Elie Wiesel, who said, we know this has happened and this is why it can happen again. And this is going back to a point I made earlier. I think this is why it's not only about making Jews more safe against anti-Semitic attacks, but also about changing society in a way that the very structures that made that possible are being changed. And I think that is something that we are still very much beginning with. We're still not at that point.
Let's look at the Jewish community and its future in Germany. There was a time when it was stuck for about 3 decades or so in a small number of 30,000. Then Soviet immigration set in. The Jewish community became this fastest growing community in Europe. And we now have around 100,000 community members plus X thousand of non-members. I don't know what the numbers are. I just hear them, mentioned without any particular statistical certainty. But in general, the community has stopped growing, or correct me if I'm wrong, but the community of members has stopped growing, and for biological reasons, more deaths than birth, it is declining. So what the two of you, how you see the future of this community, which is kind of stagnant, if not declining, at least if you take Gemeindemitglieder, members of the community. What do you see? Where do you see it going? Where is it going to be in 2030 or 2050? Come on, dream on. Nobody's going to.
Yeah, if I would be able to give a real answer to that, I would not be in this job, but in a very different one, I suppose. Yeah, so that is impossible to answer. But I think that what I hope for is that that this division between the Jewish community or the Jewish communities and the non-organized Jewish life that will be dissolved a bit, and that it will altogether be seen as the Jewish life in Germany, and through that there can also be mutual, how do you call, I don't know how you call it, but kind of fertilizing of this organized community and the non-organized Jewish life that is there. And if there's this kind of openness, then there's more possibility of growth and development.
Where would the physical growth come from? I mean, it's over as far as Russia is concerned. There is no immigration from the other parts of Europe. Where would the dynamism that fueled the Jewish community starting here in the late 19th century, where might it come from? Where will the next Jewish Nobel Prize winners come from?
That is a different question, I think, because the question of physical growth, that'll be something that only future will tell, and I do not wish for a great catastrophe that is triggering that, right? Because this is what we have seen in the late 19th century of Eastern Europe being an extremely dangerous place, of Soviet Union fall down, which is a very insecure place. So I do not wish and do not hope and do not expect those things to happen. But talking of what Hetty just said, I totally agree with what she pointed at, was that I think in the 90s still, and that tells you a lot about how Jewish communal life was being organized until the 90s after the Second World War, the only way people could imagine the integration of the Jewish influx, which was about 200,000 people, as far as I know, was through Jewish communities. And now 20, 30 years later, we can see that those people have organized in all kinds of places which are not only religious. So we see the center of Jewish life in Germany shifting from Frankfurt to Berlin. That is something we have taken as a given, but 30 years ago that was different. So that is something that happened. Then we see Jews entering, especially of the second generation Soviet migration, entering the literary field a lot, Israeli Jews as well, entering theater, entering the wider cultural sphere, and we see a more intellectual framework for Jewish life right now emerging with Ernst Ludwig Ehrlich Studienwerk and its programs like Dagesh, which is trying to platform for Jewish art, Dialogperspektiven, which is trying to open up a dialogue on different religious affiliations and atheism and all that. So what we can see is actually a widening scope of what being Jewish means and where Jews or Jewish people, self-defined Jews, define themselves. And museums start to play a role in that too, increasingly. So I think what we can see is that the Jewish framework is not being made unnecessary, but it's being kind of surrounded by different frameworks which are adding to that. And I think this is what we can call Jewish diversity, a multitude of Jewish voices, which is also a multitude of Jewish institutions.
So the future is disorganized, quote unquote. The more multiple, the more diverse, the more unorganized.
It's decentralized, I would say.
Life will be, right?
It's
yes?
I would use the term decentralized. It's not necessarily disorganized. I mean, I don't have a problem with disorder, but still I think it's going to be a decentralization of what that means. And that, again, is very modern, because that is, I think, something that we'll have to face within increasingly complex and ever more pluralistic societies as well.
Hetty, you agree? On decentralization or disorganization?
Well, I think in the sense that what I already said, that not Jewish life is not limited to the organized Jewish religious communities, and that there's more. So if you see the Zentralrat für Juden in Deutschland, that is centralized. There all Jewish organizations come together, and all the religious organizations. But there's more outside of that. So in that sense, if you then say decentralized, to that I agree. And I also find I know that in the Netherlands in the 60s and the 70s, people also thought that the Jewish life would disappear after the Second World War. I mean, there was 75% of the Jews were killed. So people thought there's no future for Jewish life in the Netherlands. They started to send their ceremonial objects to Israel because there would be the future. And also that, I mean, also on a small numerical scale, but still there is also this kind of revival already starting in the 80s in the Netherlands. So we never know, and we should never give up. That's my advice.
That's almost like a concluding sentence. I'm looking at my iPad, looking for questions. Here's a question from Billy Weitzer, the director. I believe, I'm going to just read them off. I believe that Max is preparing an exhibition. How will this exhibition, communicate what he is talking about? Billy, that's a very good question.
Now we need a good answer.
All right, now we're going to unveil the... well, I mean, I've been making this point now all through the last, 45 minutes or something about...
Don't do it again.
Say what?
Give us a new answer.
Yes, yeah, true. So the exhibition is going to be on the cultural history of Jewish revenge, of the topos of revenge, of passage, of prayers of revenge, of realities of revenge art and all that. And what it's trying to discover or to explore is a more profound, or let's say more complete idea of what Jewish subjectivity means, which has never been only victimhood and external determination by being persecuted, by being out, like being stripped of certain rights and all that, which is certainly true. But at the same time, which is a story of agency, of Jewish agency, which is not necessarily being good, not in a moral sense, but it's a story of agency. And this is very human. And I think talking about a thing like Jewish revenge really opens up a discussion which I find very inspiring, because it leads out of what I experienced as a very post-45 narrative of what being Jewish means, which was being a survivor. And I think not only being a survivor, but also being someone who has a certain agency and who is able to act and who is able to resist, is something that I find extremely interesting. And if I'd be to put this in a picture, I'd say my father's generation still had locks on the doors, and now in a way it has been exchanged for me and for a lot of people that I know with baseball bats, and that'd be a difference.
So this is, to use your own language, this is the idea of the wehrhafte Jew, the Jew who can grab a baseball bat or worse and defend himself against the bad guys?
Well, I'm saying this as an artist, right? I'm not trying to propose a Jewish political militant group, but what I'm trying to say is that I think also just because the idea of Jewish victimhood is making for very bad art, it'd be very interesting to just explore other, let's say, positions and possibilities to narrate a Jewish subject on stage and off stage. And I think that is really opening up for a discussion of who we want to be. Because in a way, I think clinging onto this idea of the post-45 Jewish position that is being given to it, and it's been assumed by the Jewish side, is stabilizing this question, which I think is really hovering above our heads still, which is the vacuum that that has been built by the 20th century. And I think this vacuum is still something that I at least am very afraid to look into. And I think to kind of go to places which really haven't been tapped, at least in my upbringing, like revenge, like the story of winning the war and not only being freed. All those things open up for a discussion, for a quest of what being Jewish in the 21st century may mean. And I think that'll be, as a quest always does, it'll mean destabilization, it'll be disorientation and disorganization, but at the same time, I think it's going to get us closer to what it means to be human, yeah.
But do you mean it literally, or do you mean the baseball bat figuratively, metaphorically?
I'd probably go for figuratively for this discussion.
Hetty, will you take the baseball bat?
You mean in a situation where it's necessary?
Whatever you choose.
Well, I think that this kind of resilience and this attitude of standing for your position is very important. And but what I also think is with these things like victimhood, etc. This is also all. Those are also stereotypes because in whatever terrible situations, Jews have also always, not always, but also been their own agents. Yep. Even in the circumstances that are given, you always have to make choices or deal with the situation within the margins that are given at the time. So that's also this idea that we talked about before, that in the past there was a kind of more homogenic kind of Jewish community, etc. Those are also all images that I don't think do justice to the reality. I mean, also like in the Netherlands, there were always Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jews. In Jewish history, you also always have to deal with transnational narratives. You know, it's always very. It is and has always been very diverse, and this is also something I think we have to give attention to and not simplify either the past or the present.
Okay, this is pretty good closing sentence, I think. We've had an hour. There aren't that many questions coming in. That means that those who listen to us agree with us completely. And now, I don't see you guys anymore. Do you see me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, here I'm back again. So, unless you want to, each of you wants to make a very brief closing comment, I suggest we call this a wonderful meeting and end it here. But the choice is up to you.
I just want to say thank you. Thank you for this open discussion, and thank you, Hetty, for sharing the stage. That was great. Thank you for the invitation, Billy.
Well, that is actually what the moderator has to say. So, the moderator says, thank both of you for patiently sitting here and working your brains for us and confronting the audience with some new ideas about a very, very old subject, Jews in Germany for the last 1700 years. And I think our conference, Shared History, is off to a good start, especially, I must say, there were no glitches, technical glitches. I can see you, you can see me, we can hear each other, and I think that means somebody up above is casting a very friendly eye on us and wishing this conference well and better. The God of technology is on our side. Thank you. Au revoir.
Au revoir. Laila tov. Tada.